Imagine waking up every morning feeling a constant weight pulling you down, a voice that compels you to prove yourself at every turn, a sense of being separate and distinct from everyone else. This inner voice tells you that you must be stronger, better, and more accomplished to be truly worthy. This voice is the ego. It builds walls that prevent you from realizing your true potential, keeping you from experiencing the peace and fulfillment of your higher self. Today, let's explore how the ego keeps us trapped and what we can learn from a story of a young Shaolin monk named Li Wei to transcend it and connect with the wisdom and stillness of our true selves. In the serene mountains of China, there existed a Shaolin temple, known for its tranquility and rigorous training of body, mind, and spirit. Among the monks was a young man named Li Wei, whose journey to enlightenment was hindered not by his physical limitations, but by an unseen burden, the weight of his ego. Li Wei was known throughout the temple for his exceptional dedication. He would rise before dawn, train until exhaustion, and meditate for hours in an attempt to reach enlightenment. He was highly skilled in martial arts and the teachings of the Buddha, and he took great pride in his abilities. Unlike his fellow monks, Li Wei approached everything as if it were a competition. He wanted to be the best, to receive praise from Master Zhang, and to be admired by all. Whenever the monks gathered to practice, Li Wei pushed himself harder than anyone else. He viewed every meditation session as a test of endurance, every martial arts form as a way to showcase his strength. He would often look around to see if anyone noticed his skill, his precision, his unwavering focus. He believed that by being better than everyone else, he could prove his worth and achieve enlightenment. The monks lived a simple life, and their days were filled with training, chores, and spiritual practice. One morning, Master Zhang, the revered head of the temple, announced that there would be a special ceremony, a symbol of unity among the monks and a testament to their devotion to the teachings of the Buddha. The monks were to carry a massive gong up to the highest peak of the mountain. Once they reached the top, they would strike the gong, allowing its resonant sound to echo through the valley below, signaling the beginning of their sacred meditation. When Master Zhang asked for volunteers to carry the gong, Li Wei immediately stepped forward. He saw this as an opportunity to prove himself, to demonstrate his strength and dedication. He was certain that if he could carry the heavy gong to the peak alone, he would be seen as the most capable, the most enlightened, the most worthy. He imagined the admiration of his peers and the approval of Master Zhang. With a sense of pride, Li Wei lifted the large gong onto his back. He felt a surge of determination as he took the first step along the steep path that wound up the mountain. The other monks walked alongside him, offering to help. But Li Wei politely declined, saying, "This is my task. I want to do it alone." The others respected his wish, though they worried about the burden he had chosen to carry. The journey up the mountain was arduous. The path was narrow and covered with loose stones, winding between thick groves of trees and sharp rocks. At first, Li Wei felt strong. He held his head high and moved with confidence, but as time passed, the weight of the gong began to press down on him. His muscles strained, his back ached, and each step seemed heavier than the last. As he climbed, Li Wei's thoughts grew louder, filled with frustration and resentment. He began to wonder why no one else had taken up the challenge, why they were content to let him bear the weight alone. He saw the other monks walking easily beside him, their hands free, their bodies unburdened. It filled him with bitterness. "Why am I the only one doing this?" he thought. "Why don't they understand my struggle?" The more Li Wei struggled, the more his ego fueled his suffering. He refused to ask for help, believing that to do so would be a sign of weakness. He had convinced himself that carrying the gong alone was a testament to his strength, but now it felt like a punishment. He was consumed by thoughts of how difficult the task was, how unfair it seemed, and how he was the only one truly pushing himself. Halfway up the mountain, Li Wei's legs began to tremble. He could feel his strength fading, the weight of the gong pressing him closer and closer to the ground. Despite his determination, his body could no longer endure the strain. He stumbled, falling to his knees. The gong, heavy and unforgiving, pressed down upon him. The other monks hurried to his side, but Li Wei, filled with pride and shame, waved them away. "No, he said through gritted teeth, his face flushed with exhaustion. "I can do this. I must do this alone." He tried to rise, but his legs gave way again and he collapsed to the ground, the gong slipping from his shoulders and landing with a dull thud. He lay there, breathing heavily, feeling a mix of anger, shame and defeat. His pride had led him here, and now he felt as though he had failed. Not just himself, but Master Zhang and all the monks who had believed in him. Master Zhang, who had been observing from a short distance, approached Li Wei with a calm and compassionate demeanor. He knelt beside the young monk, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Li Wei," he said softly, his voice filled with understanding, "why do you carry this burden alone?" Li Wei looked up, tears of frustration welling in his eyes. He could barely speak, his throat tight with emotion. "Master, I wanted to prove my strength," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to show that I am worthy." He smiled, his eyes kind and wise. "The ego," he said, "is a clever deceiver. It tells us that we must prove ourselves, that we must be better than others to have value. But this desire to prove, this need to stand above others, is what separates us from our true selves and from each other." The path to enlightenment is not a path of isolation. It is a path of unity, of understanding that we are all one. He then turned to the other monks who had gathered around. Without a word, they all moved closer, placing their hands on the gong. Together they lifted it, each monk sharing the weight, their movements synchronized. Master Zhang looked at Li Wei and nodded, inviting him to stand and join them. Humbled, Li Wei rose to his feet, and with the help of his brothers he placed his hands on the gong. They began to walk once more, the weight now distributed among many shoulders. As they moved, Li Wei felt something shift within him. The gong, once unbearably heavy, now felt lighter. The burden, once his alone, was now shared, and with that, a deep sense of peace began to fill his heart. He realized that his ego had blinded him, made him see his fellow monks as competitors rather than companions. It had made him feel alone, separate and burdened. But now, as he walked with his brothers, he felt connected, supported and uplifted. He understood that the true strength of a monk was not in his ability to carry the weight alone, but in his willingness to share it. When they reached the peak of the mountain, the monks set the gong down. Li Wei, standing among his fellow monks, felt a profound sense of unity. Master Zhang handed him the mallet, and Li Wei struck the gong. Its deep, resonant sound echoed across the valley, a sound that seemed to vibrate not only through the mountains, but through Li Wei's entire being. He closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him, and in that moment he understood. The ego had been his greatest barrier, the voice that told him he needed to prove his worth, that he needed to stand apart from others to be recognized. But the higher self, the true self, is beyond such comparisons. It is the part of us that knows we are all connected, that our worth is inherent, that we do not need to prove anything to anyone. The journey up the mountain was not just a physical challenge, it was a journey inward, a journey that revealed the truth about the ego and its power to separate us from the peace and fulfillment of our higher selves. Li Wei understood that true enlightenment was not something to be achieved alone, but something to be experienced in unity with others, in compassion and in shared understanding. The story of Li Wei teaches us a profound lesson about the nature of the ego and how it blocks us from reaching our higher selves. The ego is that voice within that constantly seeks validation. It wants to be seen as superior, fears vulnerability, and rejects help. It builds walls that isolate us, convincing us that our value comes from standing above others rather than being with them. But the truth is, we are not alone. The higher self, the part of us that is connected to all beings, that embodies compassion, wisdom and peace, can only be accessed when we let go of the ego's need to prove, to compete and to separate. It is when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to ask for help, and to share our burdens that we connect deeply with others and experience our true nature. In Buddhism, the ego is often seen as an illusion, a false sense of self that keeps us from experiencing the unity of all existence. The story of Li Wei shows us that our journey to enlightenment is not one of isolation or of proving ourselves to be better, but one of recognizing that we are all in this together, that our true strength lies in our connection to others, and that our worth is not something we need to prove. It is something that simply is. By letting go of the ego and embracing our higher self, we find the peace, fulfillment, and strength that come from unity and compassion. Just like Li Wei, we must learn that true strength is not about carrying the weight alone, but in being willing to share the burden, to connect with others, and to walk the path together.